If an avoidant wants you back, don't ask how much they miss you. Ask questions that force them to face what they avoided, because the moment their ego cracks, clarity replaces charm. Why didn't you choose me when I was still choosing you? This isn't a question, it's a mirror. Avoidants don't fear love, they fear consistency without escape. They can handle chemistry. They can handle intensity in bursts. They can even handle emotional conversations, as long as there's a door they can quietly keep unlocked. What they can't handle is the moment love becomes stable, predictable, and emotionally accountable. That's why this question lands so hard. It doesn't attack them. It doesn't accuse them. It doesn't beg for reassurance. It simply reflects reality back at them without distortion. When you ask this, you're not asking for an apology. You're asking them to confront the moment their internal system chose self-protection over connection. Avoidants often leave when things are going well, not because something is wrong, but because something is real. Consistency removes ambiguity, and ambiguity is where avoidance feels safest. This question bypasses all the usual defenses: timing, stress, confusion, and I didn't know what I wanted. Because none of those explain why you were present, and they were not. The truth is simpler and harder. They didn't leave because of you. They left because staying would have required emotional presence without an exit plan. And that's the moment their nervous system panicked. This question forces them to look at that moment. Not the breakup, not the fight, not the distance, but the choice. Make no mistake, avoidants don't drift away. They decide quietly, internally, long before you feel it. When you ask this, pay attention to what happens next. If they deflect with humor, logic, or storytelling, they're still protecting their ego. They're not ready to be seen. If they go quiet, really quiet, that's not avoidance. That's processing. That's the sound of someone realizing they can't rewrite the past without owning it. And if they actually own it without blaming you, the situation, or their fear, that's rare. That's someone touching the edge of growth. But here's the most important part, and this is where your power actually lives. You're not asking this to change them. You're asking it to observe them. An avoidant who can face this question has begun confronting their pattern. An avoidant who can't is still choosing distance, even if they say they want you back. And the calmest, strongest thing you can do is let their answer speak louder than their longing. Because love isn't proven by return, it's proven by the ability to stay. This question exposes whether they finally understand that, or whether they're still hoping you'll accept being chosen only when it feels safe for them. What exactly has changed? Not in your feelings, but in your behavior. Feelings are cheap, patterns are expensive. Avoidants often come back sounding different, softer, more reflective, suddenly fluent in emotion. They'll tell you they missed you, that they've thought about you constantly, that losing you made them realize what they had, and for a moment, it feels convincing. But emotional language has always been an avoidant's safest disguise, because words create closeness without requiring consistency. That's why this question matters so much. It collapses fantasy. It takes the conversation out of nostalgia and drops it into reality. You're no longer asking how they feel. You're asking how they intend to show up. Avoidance can feel deeply and still disappear. They can miss you and still withhold. They can love you and still avoid responsibility. So when you ask this, you're drawing a hard line between emotion and action. What exactly has changed? Not in your feelings, but in your behavior. That sentence alone shifts the entire dynamic, because behavior is measurable. It has weight. It creates safety. Or it doesn't. This question demands specifics. How will you communicate when you're overwhelmed instead of going silent? How will you stay available when intimacy triggers your urge to pull back? How will you remain consistent when things stop feeling easy or exciting? An avoidant who hasn't done the internal work will struggle here. They'll stay vague, they'll speak in intentions instead of commitments. They'll say things like, I'm trying, I'll do better, or I understand. But understanding without change is just insight, not transformation. Watch closely. If they can't articulate clear behavioral shifts, they're not offering a new relationship. They're offering temporary relief from loneliness. They want the comfort of you, not the responsibility of showing up differently. And this is where many people get pulled back in. Because emotional fluency feels like growth, but growth shows up as predictability, not poetry. A regulated nervous system doesn't need dramatic declaration. It needs follow through. An avoidant who has actually changed will answer differently. They won't over-explain, they won't perform insight, they'll talk about boundaries, they're practicing tools they're using when they feel the urge to withdraw, specific ways they plan to stay present when discomfort arises. And even then, here's the quiet truth. You don't owe belief to words. You owe yourself discernment. This question isn't meant to trap them, it's meant to slow things down enough for reality to reveal itself. Because reconnection without behavioral change is just repetition with better language. And repetition is what broke you the first time. If they can't answer this clearly, it doesn't mean they don't care. It means they're still prioritizing emotional safety over emotional responsibility. And the most self-respecting thing you can do is not argue with that. Let them feel the weight of what's required, because the version of you they're trying to come back to, the one who accepted potential instead of presence, no longer exists. And if they truly want you back, their behavior will be the proof long before their feelings ever. How do you plan to show up when things feel uncomfortable again? Because comfort was never the problem. Intimacy was. Avoidants don't disappear when things are falling apart. They disappear when things are getting close, when emotions deepen, when expectations become mutual, when love starts asking for consistency instead of intensity. That's the moment their nervous system interprets connection as threat. So this question doesn't focus on the past, it focuses on the future, specifically the moment you already know is coming, because discomfort is inevitable. There will be misunderstandings. There will be emotional exposure. There will be moments where staying present feels heavier than pulling away. And that's exactly where avoidants have historically checked out. This question forces them to confront their exit strategy. Not the breakup, not the distance, but the internal moment where they decide to withdraw instead of engage. How do you plan to show up when things feel uncomfortable again? Notice what this question does. It removes romance. It removes nostalgia. It removes the illusion that love alone is enough. Now we're talking about regulation. An avoidant who hasn't done the work will answer with hope instead of structure. They'll say things like, I'll try not to shut down, I'll communicate more, or I'll be better. But trying is not a plan, intention is not a tool. Avoidance isn't a lack of desire, it's a lack of capacity in moments of emotional pressure. So what you're really asking is, what will you do when your nervous system wants to escape? Will you name the discomfort or disappear? Will you ask for space or take it without explanation? Will you stay emotionally available or go silent and leave you guessing? If they can't answer this clearly, they haven't built the capacity required to stay. And this is important to understand. Avoidants don't need more motivation, they need mechanisms. They need practiced responses for the moments their instinct tells them to run. That's why this question matters so deeply. Someone who has actually grown will speak differently. They'll mention awareness of their triggers. They'll talk about slowing down instead of shutting down. They'll describe concrete steps they take when they feel overwhelmed, even if imperfect. They won't promise perfection. They'll promise presence. And here's the part most people miss. Silence is an answer. If they avoid this question, change the subject, or become emotionally vague, that's not discomfort, that's unpreparedness. No answer means no readiness. Not because they don't care, but because they still rely on avoidance as regulation. And love cannot survive where regulation depends on withdrawal. This question isn't meant to pressure them, it's meant to protect you. Because intimacy doesn't break avoidance, unconsciousness does. The only way forward with someone who avoids is if they can stay conscious when closeness activates fear. So ask the question calmly, without expectation, without needing reassurance, and then watch. How someone plans to show up in discomfort tells you everything about whether they're capable of staying when things finally get real again. What did you learn about yourself after losing me? If they learned nothing, they're about to repeat everything. This question is deceptively simple, but it's one of the most revealing things you can ask an avoidant. It doesn't invite romance. It doesn't invite longing. It invites self-confrontation. And this is where ego either collapses or performs. Loss does one of two things to an avoidant. It either forces reflection or it gets rewritten into a story that protects their identity. That's why you need to listen less to how emotional their answer sounds and more to where the focus lands. Real growth sounds grounded. It's specific. It's uncomfortable. Ego, on the other hand, sounds poetic. Ego speaks in insight without ownership, in language that feels deep but changes nothing. When an avoidant hasn't truly processed the loss, their answer will drift outward. They'll talk about how the timing was wrong, how life was overwhelming, how circumstances made things difficult, how you triggered them, challenged them, or asked for too much. None of that is learning. It's distancing. Because learning turns the lens inward. Learning sounds like, I realized how quickly I detach when I feel needed. I saw how I use independence to avoid vulnerability, or I noticed I shut down instead of communicating when emotions rise. There's no performance in that. There's accountability. This question exposes whether the loss actually reached them or whether they've wrapped it in nostalgia to make it survivable. Many avoidants don't grieve the relationship. They grieve the idea of it. They miss the comfort, the familiarity, the regulation you provide, but they never sit with the part they played in losing it. So when you ask this, don't rush to respond. Don't fill the silence. Let them speak. If their answer centers on your flaws, they haven't integrated the loss. If it centers on timing, they're still externalizing responsibility. If it centers on circumstances, they're avoiding self-examination. And here's the hardest truth. Someone who hasn't learned from losing you will only experience you as a lesson after you're gone again. Because insight that isn't embodied becomes repetition. This question isn't about hearing regret. Regret can exist without change. It's about hearing recognition. Recognition of pattern, recognition of avoidance, recognition of how their defenses cost them something real. And if they can't articulate that calmly, clearly, without blame, then their desire to come back isn't about growth. It's about soothing the discomfort of absence, which means the cycle is still intact. Asking this question isn't cruel. It's clarifying, because love isn't measured by how much someone misses you. It's measured by what they're willing to confront because they lost you. And if they learned nothing, they're not standing at a new beginning. They're standing at the edge of the same ending, just hoping this time you'll stay long enough for them to feel better again. What are you willing to risk this time that you weren't before? Avoidants love safety until safety costs them you. Avoidants are masters of controlled connection. They know how to stay close enough to feel something, but far enough to feel safe. They don't fear relationships, they fear what relationships demand when they become real. Real connection requires risk. Risking vulnerability instead of self-containment. Risking consistency instead of selective availability. Risking being fully seen instead of partially present. That's why this question cuts so deeply. It doesn't ask if they care. It asks what they're willing to give up, what they're willing to lose control over. What are you willing to risk this time that you weren't before? Most avoidants left not because they didn't love you, but because loving you threatened their sense of safety. They protected their independence, their emotional autonomy, their ability to leave without explanation, and they called that peace until safety cost them you. This question forces them to confront the truth that change isn't about insight, it's about exposure. Someone who hasn't done the work will hesitate. They'll circle around it, they'll speak in abstractions, they'll promise effort without naming sacrifice, because naming the risk makes it real. And real is what avoidants have historically avoided. Hesitation tells you everything. It reveals whether they're seeking growth or just relief from loneliness. Proximity without exposure feels like love to an avoidant because it soothes their nervous system without threatening their defenses. But that's not love. That's regulation. Love requires allowing yourself to be impacted, to be known, to be disappointed without disappearing. An avoidant who is ready will answer differently. They won't romanticize risk. They'll name it plainly. They might talk about risking emotional honesty instead of withdrawal, risking consistency even when it feels uncomfortable, risking letting you see them struggle instead of pretending they're fine. They won't say it confidently. They'll say it consciously. And the quiet truth is this: if they can't name the risk, they're not ready for the reward. And the reward isn't you coming back. It's intimacy, something they can only access when safety is no longer the highest priority. How will you respond when I stop chasing and start observing? This question terrifies an avoidant more than confrontation. Avoidants are not afraid of conflict. They're afraid of stillness. Because stillness removes the noise they hide behind. When you chase, explain, accommodate, or reach for them, the dynamic stays familiar. Claim control, deciding when to engage, when to pull back, and how much access you get. Pursuit gives an avoidant structure. It reassures them that distance won't cost them connection, but the moment you stop chasing and start observing, everything shifts. This question flips the entire dynamic on its head. It quietly announces that you are no longer managing the relationship for them. You're no longer filling in the gaps they leave behind. You're no longer overfunctioning so they can underfunction. And that is deeply destabilizing to an avoidance ego. How will you respond when I stop chasing and start observing? Now they're no longer responding to desire. They're responding to consequence. And consequence is where the ego can no longer perform comfortably. An avoidant who is ready will not panic. They may feel the weight of the question, but they won't run from it. They'll slow down, meet you where you are, and engage without pressure or manipulation. An avoidant who isn't ready will react very differently. They'll minimize, deflect, or disappear. Resistance may look like questioning your motives, trying to provoke emotional reactions, or rushing intimacy to regain control. That's not connection. That's control attempting to reassert itself. This question exposes whether they want a partner or a regulator. When you stop chasing, an avoidant has to choose between stepping forward or stepping away. There's no hiding in between. Silence is an answer. If they avoid, change the subject, or become vague, that's not discomfort, that's unpreparedness. The only way forward with an avoidant is if they can stay conscious when closeness activates fear. Ask calmly, without expectation or reassurance, and watch. How they respond in stillness tells you everything about whether they're capable of staying when things finally get real again. If I don't come back, what does that force you to face? This is where the ego either shatters or hides. This question is not meant to wound, it's meant to reveal, because nothing exposes an avoidant more clearly than the possibility of permanent loss. This isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Up until this point, there's still an unspoken safety net, a hope that you might return, a belief that connection can be reactivated without deep reckoning. This question removes that illusion. If I don't come back, what does that force you to face? Now they're responding to consequence, not desire. And consequence is where the ego can no longer perform comfortably. An avoidant who is ready will not panic. They'll acknowledge loss, recognize patterns, and speak about self-confrontation without deflection. They understand that losing you didn't just end a relationship, it exposed parts of themselves they can no longer ignore. An avoidant who isn't ready will react differently. They'll minimize, deflect, or disappear. Silence, rationalization, or vague responses reveal avoidance, not insight. Facing loss requires staying present with emotions they've historically avoided. You are not responsible for how they handle this question. You are asking them to see the cost of avoidance, the impact of emotional withdrawal, and the fact that connection cannot survive without presence. This question isn't about making them regret losing you. It's about determining whether they can sit with reality. Someone who cannot tolerate the idea of losing you without minimizing or escaping is not capable of staying emotionally available when love becomes demanding. If they can meet this question honestly, there is potential for change. If they can't, walking away isn't abandonment, it's alignment. Clarity is the reward here, because it shows whether they are ready to confront the cost of losing you or whether they're hoping you'll stay long enough for them to feel better again. If they want you back, they don't need reassurance, they need reckoning. Ask these questions calmly, without attachment, without urgency, because the moment an avoidant realizes they can't return to the version of you who accepted less, that's when the ego breaks and the truth finally shows itself.